Glad everybody is on here. We're going to go ahead and get started because I want to make sure I've got enough time to cover all the frameworks with you. I will be sending out just a little bit of a kind of a backup as well. So I'll send you the graphics for the frameworks. You're more than welcome to, take a picture of the screens or whatever you want to as well. If there's anything that you want to kind of keep track of, I will keep my participant list open so that if additional people come in, we can make sure that they get into the meeting. They get the same opportunity. I want to start with just a little bit about who I am. I know some of you, but there's a lot of you that I don't know that are on here. My background, I went to Angelo State University, absolutely had a fantastic time in college, got a Bachelor of Arts in Interpersonal Communication, worked a few years, then went back and got a master's in psychology. I've been coaching people since 1994. I've had a variety of settings where I've had the opportunity to work with people and just help them to find their potential. I started with the state of Texas, worked with a program called Project Rio with Texas Employment Commission back then before we changed the Texas workforce. But I helped people as they were transitioning out of prison and going into life, trying to figure out how to get their feet under them, how to get their life right. And I learned a lot of really valuable skills through that. And that's where a lot of sociology and psychology really came in handy. I've written 25 books. You can find all of them on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com. I've done 3 certification programs that I developed and 30 plus trainings. Cool part for me is when I first went into business, I had some great experiences having the opportunity to work outside of the country. I had the chance to go work in Spain. I've worked in Australia. I've worked in India. I've worked in Canada. I've worked in China. So I've worked in some really cool places, and I've hit 35 of the states. I have one that was kind of on the border, but they came across the border to work with me. So that's where the plus is. I've worked with Workforce Solutions in multiple cities. I think they are a phenomenal organization. And if you're not using them to help find the right people and build the right skills for your team, you're really missing out because they're wonderful. So I want to give you 4 different things today: a brief history of coaching and of what's going on in the world right now, some of what has changed in employment and kind of why that is so important that we stay in front of that. I'm going to talk about the process of coaching and the specific 3 things that you're trying to do in order to get people to follow along and do the things you need them to do because it was their idea. And then I'm going to give you 3 very specific frameworks that I believe are the catalyst for behavior change for anybody that you're working with. And if you master these 3 frameworks, even if you don't master anything else, you'll end up much more successful in building the potential of your people. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how you go put this into action in the next week. Because if you can take something that you learned today and you do something with it in the next week, that's when you get the greatest benefit. So I want to make sure that you're getting the greatest possible benefit, the greatest potential out of the things that you're doing. So the world we live in isn't quite the same as it was when I first started working and started coaching people. When I started coaching people back in 1994, we were still in what I would call the old world. The old world was still managed and led by traditionalists. There's a lot of baby boomers working there, and there were some Gen Xers. It was the first time when my generation entered the workforce that there were actually 3 generations working together. And I thought it was a fascinating time because when you think about that mix and match of the different generations, it can be a little bit tough because we were all raised differently. Where you grew up, how you grew up were all important, but more important than those is the meaning that you gave to the experiences that you had when you were growing up. The baby boomers are the largest generation that we've ever had in US history, and they were just over 80 million strong. Now, post World War II, we had a boom in our economy and a boom in the number of births in the United States, and that became the baby boomer generation. They were born from 1946 to 1964, and they work. Let me just tell you, the traditionalists, which 60% of the males during the traditionalist generation were active duty military at some point, they raised their kids to be really strong workers. But the boomers were fascinating because they had a shift in their generation where they split. They had half the generation that was really straight-laced and hardworking, and they had another half of the generation that they were kind of trying to figure out the world around them, and They experimented with different things and they looked at the world differently. And so it started creating kind of this rift, but it was a catalyst for a lot of really positive change in the workplace. It shifted equality, it shifted the way that we work, it made things more of a level playing field. And a lot of baby boomers fought for equal rights for different people. So, really amazing generation, really hardworking, both men and women working. 1968, 25% of adult women were in the paid labor force, 75% were not in the paid labor force. So they were working, they were just running the household. Go to 1972, just a 5-year window, and we went to 46% of women in the paid labor force. And we've never slowed down since then. So we saw this massive uptick from 1968 to 1972, and then a steady climb where we have a pretty even amount of males and females in the workplace. Along comes Generation X. Now, the Gen Xers are the smallest generation in US history. There's only 46 million Gen Xers compared to 80 million boomers. And the reason I want you to know the numbers here is because where we're at with our shortage of employees isn't that young people don't want to work or they don't have a work ethic. It's that we have this perfect storm of generational shifting, and we have this need to learn to coach people in a different way. So with the Gen Xers, 34 million fewer, they were a little more balanced towards, I want to work, but then I really want to play as well. And it was a little less about, I just want to go to work and I just want to make an impact there, and more, I want to have my family and I want to have my work. Then along comes the millennials, and the millennials, kind of like the baby boomers, had some big divides in there. You had really hard workers, you had kids that didn't want to launch and didn't want to grow up, move out of their parents' house. So you had a variety within that generation. I would kind of argue the millennials are really three distinct subsets. You had the early millennials who went through the economic crash in 2008. And so they stepped up their game. They work really hard. They're really driven. You had this little set that was born between about 1989 and 1995. They really are not predictable. The things that they do are all over the board. So some of them are hard workers. Some of them are really exploring where they want to go with their life, but they're all over the board and you can't pigeonhole them into anything. And then you've got the younger millennials, which have kind of charted their own course as well. But there's about 74.5 million millennials. And then along comes Gen Z. So the millennials, the Xers were born 65 to 80. The millennials were born 81 through about the year 1999. And then Gen Z started being born in the year 2000, and they went to about 2020. And so you look at these shifts, the boomers 10 years ago were the majority of the workforce. Today, they represent 8% of the total workforce. We will never see the Gen Xers as the majority of the workforce. Right now, the biggest segment of the workforce is millennials, and then Gen X, and then Gen Z. So the Gen Z, and looking at the variations on these, one of the things that we've shifted significantly from one generation to the next is the definition of being accountable for the things that we do. So it's really important to understand that we're in this place where we're trying to beat a psychological premise and a workplace premise from the 1970s called Price's Law. Price's Law stated that if you take the total number of employees in your workforce and you take the square root of that number, that's the number of people producing roughly half of the outcomes that your workplace is achieving. So if you have 10 people in the workforce, then about 3 of them are producing half of the work. If you have 100 people, then about 10 of them are producing half of the work. So the bigger the organization, the bigger the disparage is between top performers and bottom performers. What's interesting, though, is if you put it into 3 distinct categories, top, average, and bottom, what you find is you have about the same number of top performers as you have bottom performers. The bottom performers, if they left, you probably wouldn't miss them. The top performers, if they left, you would miss them greatly. So what we want to look at is, how do we take people and build up their potential? So my story is, I went into business for myself in 1999, but it started kind of out of a little bit of a frustration that I had an amazing boss, and then my boss left and I got a not so amazing boss. And I remember performing really, really well for the boss that coached me consistently. And then when I got the boss that didn't coach me consistently and who was a lot of times really not even that nice to me, I watched my performance go down until I was kind of burned out and I went and found a different job. And then I had an amazing boss and my performance went way up and I accomplished a lot of really cool things. And then that boss left and I got a boss that wasn't so amazing and my performance went down again. Third time, got a new boss, a guy named Richard. He was phenomenal. Loved working for him, was knocking it out of the park for him. And then my performance went down when he left, and I got a not so great boss. So 3 times in a row, I noticed that I want to be a top performer, but my performance was directly impacted by the way that my boss, my direct supervisor, communicated with me. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has validated that information in saying that if you track why people voluntarily leave, you will find that 82% of why people leave is because of their direct supervisor or one level above that. How we coach, how we communicate, how we manage matters intensely. Second thing that we notice is there is a principle in positive psychology back in the late 1960s, early 1970s that said, if we'll just be really nice to people and tell them that they're fantastic and that they're wonderful, then they'll go perform. But the research now for roughly 80 years proves the contrary of that. What the research says is that if we will give people create a strong challenge for them and we will coach them to be successful, then what we find is that they have the greatest fulfillment and the greatest joy or good experience in working for us. So it's the opposite of what you might think. You would think people are really looking for, I want my life to be easier, I want my job to be easier. But what really people are wanting is, I want a purpose that goes beyond just earning a paycheck. And I want a challenge that makes me feel good about myself. Your self-worth, your value or concept of self, it grows when you're challenged. I was the happiest when I was being pushed to give my very best. And it's been consistent for 80 years of research. And Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and Dan Ariely are two of my favorite researchers on this. They both were able to demonstrate that maximum challenge and maximum coaching and development, coupled with the achievement of some challenge that seemed bigger than yourself, that's what makes you happy. That's also what retains employees. So we don't want to make the world easier, because when people are bored and not challenged, then they tend to go away. We want to create the perfect challenge with the perfect development so that people push themselves and then start seeing greater value in themselves. Our self-worth is tied to our ability to overcome problems and to solve those problems in such a way that we go, man, I didn't know if I could do that, but this really worked out. This is amazing. So my backstory is, I love a challenge. I love knowing that there's something that needs to be accomplished and I can push myself to go accomplish it. But my backstory also includes, when I have intentionally sought out great coaches and great mentors, I have always performed at a significantly higher level. And that's the same thing that's true for everybody I've ever worked with, is that when they perform at their best, it's because somebody pushed them to perform at their best. So think back to if you played sports and you had a coach that really pushed you. They're yelling at you, come on, Holland, you can run faster. Come on, Holland, you've got this. And you push yourself to give your very best. And at the end of the day, when you gave everything you had, you left it all on the court or all on the field, you felt fantastic about yourself. That's what coaching is supposed to do for our people at work. It's supposed to help them leave it all out there in the game where they gave their very best and they performed at the highest level that they could possibly perform at. And then at the end of the day, they look back and they go, I did that. And they feel very good about the things that they did. So I want to give you a little bit of a case study. And this was one of the more interesting studies. I had gone through a program looking at some of the research out of UCLA and looking at how emotions change. And you can try this if you want while you're on the webinar. The people who are not on the webinar may think you're weird. That's totally okay, because it makes it more fun. I wanted to help people figure out how to get rid of some of the negative emotions and control their positive emotions. And I was working with Ascension Health out of St. Louis, Missouri, at one of their locations. And I asked the CEO of that hospital, what is the worst department you have, the biggest struggle you've got right now? And I was just starting to work with that hospital. And he said, that's easy. That's our emergency department. People are angry all the time there. I said, all right, I want to start with them. And so I went down and I visited with some people and kind of figured out what I thought was going on. And then I went back and I said, here's what I want to do. I want to teach emotional control. And I want to show you that both the emotional control coupled with affirmation, what that can do in the next 6 months. And he said, okay, so what is this going to cost me? And I gave him a quote and he goes, all right, well, this better work. It will. Just trust me. And I actually gave him a guarantee that if it didn't work, I'd give him all his money back. So I went in, and the first thing I taught people is how to hold themselves as if they were happy. And so I want you to think about, if you want to do it on camera, you're more than welcome to do that. But just imagine, what do you look like physically when you're happy? You open up your facial expression. Do you smile? Do your shoulders go back and up just a little bit? What do you look like? And then what do you look like when you're depressed or unhappy? What you notice with us as humans is all negative emotion rolls in, all positive emotion opens up. So I went to them with this study out of UCLA that showed that clinical depression could be beaten more effectively with physical presence than it could actually with medication. And they had taken 90 clinically depressed people, put them into 3 different groups, 30, 30, and 30. The first group, they gave them an antidepressant, and they said, we want you to take this antidepressant. That's the only change you need to make for the next 15 months. Every day they took the pill. Second group, they used the placebo effect. And they said, I want you to take this pill. It will make you feel better, but take it every day. The third group, they gave them a mirror, and they said, I want you to look at yourself in the mirror for an hour a day and smile. Big, silly smile. Look as happy as you can look. I knew I wasn't going to get people at this emergency department to smile for an hour a day, but I knew that this might work. So the first group that was on the antidepressant, 14 of the 30 were not depressed after 15 months. So fairly effective. The second group, the placebo effect, 16 of the 30 were not depressed after the 15 months, even better impact. The third group that had to smile, physically hold themselves as if they were happy for an hour a day in 29 days, 29 of the 30 were no longer depressed. By 45 days, 30 of the 30 were no longer depressed. Now, I don't know that you would have 100% of positive effect on everyone with this, but it was fascinating enough that I wanted to try it as an experiment at work. So as said, I want you to do a power pose where you're happy and a smile on your face. And we're going to do this for 2 minutes at the start of the shift, standing in a big circle, looking at each other. The only people that I struggled to get to participate were the really professional ones, the doctors. So I pulled one of the doctors aside, the one that just refused to participate. And I said, what did you want to be when you grew up? He said, I wanted to be a doctor. I said, what kind of medicine did you want to practice? He said, emergency medicine. I said, where did you want to live? He said, Florida. And that's where we were. I said, what did you want to drive? He said, a Maserati. And that was the first time he smiled when he thought about his car. I said, so let me make sure I understand. You wanted to be a doctor in emergency medicine, living in Florida, driving a Maserati, and you've got all of it. And he goes, well, yeah. I said, why are you unhappy? And he said, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure my ex-wife would like to know the answer to that as well. And so I said, can you do me a favor? I just told everybody else on the staff that every time they walk by you, they have to smile really big and silly until you start smiling. He goes, if you'll tell them not to do that, I'll smile. I said, fantastic. So we did these power poses for the first 2 minutes of every shift, 3 shifts a day. We did it for the next 6 months. And during that time, we had a 50% reduction in turnover, a 40% increase from 83% of potential to 123% of potential in performance. And they made an extra $1.6 million in net profit. What they did is they became the provider of choice in a community that had 11 hospitals, 11 emergency departments. And it was because of the attitude of the staff. So I tell you the story because I want you to know that coaching isn't always a really complicated process. All we had to do was address the negative emotions, provide a strategy for them to connect and see one another happy, and then provide a framework for the leaders to be able to coach people more effectively. When we did those three basic things, we had a very significant impact on the overall success of that organization. What is interesting to me is that it isn't that tough, but it had to be consistent. So I had the director of the department involved. I had the head of the physician group involved. I had the CEO committed. I had the COO, HR director, CFO, CNO, all of the C's. They were all committed to supporting this strategy for 6 months. We carried the strategy into the hospital itself over the next 6 months after that initial experiment in that one department, increased their net profit by more than $20 million in that 6-month window. When you coach, you get outcomes, but we have a tendency to be so busy in our world that we just do the work and we don't think about how we're doing the work and how we're interacting. And I want to tell you psychologically why this actually worked. The reason is in your prefrontal cortex, you have what's called mirror neurons. A mirror neuron is designed to understand the emotions of the people around you and then reflect back those emotions. People are stressed and tense and angry and upset and unhappy. That's the emotion that's getting replicated. And if you look at the world around us and what's gone on with media and gone on social media, we have a lot more negative than we used to have in our world. I remember back to growing up in the 1970s, and we would watch Walter Cronkite on the news, and it was just Walter. Walter just talked about stuff that was going on. Some of it was good and some of it was not good, but it was pretty balanced. Now we're very heavily weighted towards what's wrong in the world. And so we have more and more of this negative influence on us that kind of brings us down and keeps us from being at the level of performance and fulfillment that we actually want to be at. You couple that with some shifts in the way that we actually think about work, and you start realizing we haven't been coaching people to success. We've been surviving. So when we're coaching, we're doing several very specific things. The first is we're trying to create a connection. I had to go into that emergency department, visit with them, get to know them, build some trust with them in order for them to listen to me. If I was just some random guy that came in and said, everybody has to smile for the next 2 minutes, I really don't think people would have paid attention. So by listening effectively, and there's 4 steps to being a great listener, but by listening effectively, that was how I gained their trust. Second thing I had to do is I had to look for the gaps from where we were to where we wanted to be. And what that ended up being is we were demonstrating too much negative emotion. And that was what's causing people to leave. When I did exit interviews with the people who had left, they said, well, it was just too stressful. Too many people were angry. Physicians were yelling at me. I didn't want to be there. Then I had to collaborate with the employees to build that bridge from where we were to where we wanted to be. Anytime you're solving a problem, anytime you're coaching a person, what you're trying to do is identify the gap from the current state to the desired state. In building that bridge or that gap from where we are to where we want to be, what we're doing is we're shifting their perception of what reality is. We're building skills, we're building behaviors, changing perception. Quick story that kind of goes with this, and this is a basis early on in my coaching once I started my business in 1999, was that I needed to shift perceptions. And I was working with a manager in Lufkin, Texas, and I just could not get that person to really understand that they were the cause of turnover within their department. So I drew a circle in the center of the page and I said, here's you. And I wrote their name in there. And then I drew 5 circles around the page. And this may be something you want to try with your people, but I did 5 circles around that center circle and I drew a line to each one of those. So you had this little diagram. I said, who are the 5 people that have the greatest impact on your success or your failure at work? And that gave me 5 different names. And I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being perfect, 1 being horrible, how would you think they would rate the relationship with you? 1 was a 2, 1 was a 4, 1 was a 7. So all over the board, 7 was the highest, 2 was the lowest. And on each one, I said, what do you think that you could do in the next 24 hours to get that person to believe instead of a 2, that the relationship was a 3? So when you're shifting things in coaching, a lot of times what we do wrong is we say, look, you're causing the problem. You need to change. What I did instead is I flipped the script and said, how do I get that person to perceive you differently? You're still changing behaviors, but you're taking it away from here's what's wrong with you to how do we get them to see something better in you? That one little tweak when you're coaching has a massive impact in bridging the gap from where they are to where you want them to be. When you do that, you help create the better outcomes because you get that person to be a little more inspired to change, a little more frustrated, a little less frustrated with going that direction and more frustrated with where they are right now. Because they start thinking, God, all I have to do is do this one thing different and they will see me different. Instead of saying, I need to be different, it's I'm trying to help them see me different. That's a big change in perception. So I'm going to take you through 4 things that you do that make coaching work. The first is you have to create a connection. People only change when they feel it is in their best interest for them to change and when they feel it is the right thing to do. Oops, sorry about that. So we use interpersonal techniques to do that. And I said a second ago that there's 4 steps to being a great listener. This is one of your bonuses. That's not a graphic in here, but you have to first focus on that person. We live in a very distracted world. It's very easy for us to get pushed in one direction or another. And we have our phones going off and we have emails going off and people walking in. We have all these different things that are vying for our attention. When you are with somebody, be with that person. Don't be in 45 different directions. Just be with that person. That's step number 1 in being a great listener is focus. Step number 2 is respond non-verbally. What you'll notice, and if you want to try this in the next staff meeting you're in, where your boss is leading a staff meeting, or when you're just listening to people in a staff meeting, overreact a little bit non-verbally and watch how it changes their energy. So focus is first, respond non-verbally is second. When we respond non-verbally with facial expressions and body language and tone of voice, it lets people know that we're truly connected with them. The third piece of being a great listener is you have to ask questions. So as you're asking questions, you're trying to dig deeper with that person to understand we're here, we want to be here, trying to figure out what the actual gap is. Most of the time when people tell you what the problem is and they put it up in front of you, that's not the real problem. That is a symptom of the problem. So you have to ask questions and dig deeper to get to the root cause of whatever the problem is. So third is ask questions. The fourth thing that you do is what's called the feedback loop. The feedback loop is you're listening to what they're saying, and when it feels appropriate, you either validate what they said to make sure you got it right, or you summarize what they said to check to understand if you understood it. So lead-ins might be something like, so what you're saying is, and then you do a summary, or that must have been, and you're looking for the context or the emotion of it. And that's what validates what they said and checks to make sure that you're on the same page. When you're doing feedback, you don't do it at the end of every sentence. If you do it at the end of every sentence, that's just called being annoying. We don't want to be annoying. We want to be connected. Listening is the greatest way to connect with the people that you work with. So you really want to stay focused on how you can listen effectively in order to create that connection. So again, the 4 steps of being a great listener are focus on the speaker, respond non-verbally, ask questions, feedback what you heard. If you listen, which by the way, as a leader is 45% of what you should spend your time doing. If you listen and listen effectively, you create very quick connections with the people around you. The second thing that you're doing is you're trying to control perception. William James, who is considered the father of American psychology, once said, that which I perceive is my reality. Now, we are trying to shift perception because that automatically shifts behaviors. I'm going to fast forward from 1902, when William James said that, up to the late 1960s for a guy named Carl Rogers from Ohio State University, where he came up with what he called his self-concept theory. When we can create the right self-concept of a person, they will always perform at their very best. We think about people as going, well, you have potential or you don't have potential, but that's not really the case. Everybody has tremendous potential, But our job is to get them to perceive that they have more than what they're currently offering. When you look at yourself, you have this self-image or self-concept. Then you create this ideal self. And that's part of what our job is in coaching and developing our people, is to help them create an ideal self-image in the role that they play. Then you work with them to say, well, what are people who are already achieving that ideal self that you're striving for? What are they doing? If we can get them to think about what somebody else is doing, and then we can ask, do you think that you're a relatively intelligent person? Well, everybody thinks they're relatively intelligent. And you go, okay, well, I think the other person you're talking about is probably relatively intelligent, about the same as you. Maybe not quite as bright as you, but still pretty bright. And I usually say it like that, maybe not as bright as you, but still pretty bright, because I want to make sure I'm planting this idea of their capability. Then I ask, what do you think they believe about themselves that has them achieving at the level that they're achieving? It's really important that you structure the question that way for the perception piece. What do you think they believe about themselves? By doing that, they're going to create this idea that if they believe that about themselves, they've adjusted their self-concept and it moves them in the right direction. So that is the part of trying to control perception. The correction piece, this is where we are educating. Now, the Latin word, which was the root of education, was educo, which means to draw from another. Correction isn't about forcing change. It's about creating accountability and presenting them with the choice to change. Everybody wants to have some level of autonomy or self-control in their world. So our job is to keep asking questions, just like in the 4 steps of listening, step number 3, until they get to the place where they choose to change. If I force a person to change, the change will not last. This is why we get so frustrated at work when we go to a person, we go, oh my gosh, you did this, you were supposed to do this, do it right from now on. And they'll do it right once, and then they'll go back to where they were. Unless they internally own it, they're not going to change. This brings us to the 4th step of coaching. That's solidification. In solidification, we're planting, anchoring, and reinforcing. And I want to tell you another story to kind of go along with this. I was in a group, about 45 people, all leaders for this big group in Dallas. We all came together. We were doing once a month training. This is about the 4th month into the training. And I was talking about accountability. And this one lady raises her hand and said, I know what you're saying about accountability, but I can't be on time. I said, you can't be on time? She goes, I've never in my life been on time. There is no possibility of me being on time. So I asked her the question, have you ever done anything right in your life? And she goes, of course I've done things right. Okay, we're going back to perception. I said, so what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, using listening skills, is that when you have chosen to do things right, you could do things right. Well, absolutely, when I've chosen. Okay, walk me through what your morning looks like. She said, well, I get up at, and she told me the time. I said, okay, and then what do you do? So, well, then I do this, then what? And I went through each step of what she does. And each time I ask, and how long does that take? And she told me on each thing, from getting up, getting herself ready, getting her kids up, feeding them breakfast, dropping them at school, heading to work. And each one of those, I wrote down the amount of time. I said, oh, okay, so you're 20 minutes late to work every day. She goes, well, yeah, how'd you know it's 20 minutes? I said, math. I wrote down when you woke up, and I wrote down how much each thing took, how much time each thing took. And she said, oh, well, you're just going to tell me to get up earlier. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you, I believe you know how to be on time. I just don't think that you've yet chosen to be on time. So I'm planting the idea that she knows how to do it. I said, so what do you think you could cut out that you're spending time on that would help you to be on time? She goes, I don't know. I said, what if you stop feeding your kids? I mean, that's like 20 minutes to fix breakfast and feed your kids. If you just don't feed them anymore, you'll be on time. She goes, I am not going to stop feeding my kids. That's ridiculous. Okay, well, I guess that makes you a good mom. So what do you think? Maybe don't do hair and makeup? Show up in pajamas every day? Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm at a loss. What do you think that you could do differently in order to be on time? So I keep going back to cultivating that soil that she knows the answer. And she says, well, I could get up earlier if I wanted to. Okay, if you wanted to. So do you want to? Yes, I want to. I said, I believe you. And I can't wait to call you tomorrow at 8 a.m. to congratulate you on being on time. What's your direct number? And I wrote down her direct number. And the next morning at exactly 8 a.m., I called. She was a little out of breath when she answered, but she said, hello. I said, I just want to tell you how proud I am of you for choosing to be on time. When you do that, you set an amazing example for the rest of your team. This is anchoring. When you choose to do that, you set a great example. And she goes, well, thank you for that. I said, you're absolutely welcome. I can't wait to talk to you tomorrow. Now, the reinforcement piece, it takes about 21 reinforcements to change a lifelong behavior. If it's something that was a short-term thing, you can probably change it quicker. But she indicated to me that her entire life she'd been late for everything. So I knew that I needed to dig a little deeper. I said, I'm going to call you every working day for the next 30 days. She said, okay, I'll be ready. By day 3, it was, hello, good morning. Not out of breath. She had been at her desk already had a cup of coffee. She was doing great. And every time I used that anchoring strategy to reinforce over and over again exactly what I wanted her to do. And I said, I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate, that's my feeling, when you choose to be on time, that's her behavior, because it has such a positive impact on the people around you. That is the part where we describe the impact. So you have a feeling, you have a behavior, you have an impact, and you put it in any order you want, but you've got to have those 3 things for anchoring and reinforcing over and over again. So behavior, feeling, impact have to be in there. When we do that, we solidify the change because it starts becoming a part of who they believe their self-concept is. The moment you shift a person's self-concept, you have them as a new person. So a few of the clients that I've done this with, that I've had a chance to work with, uh, on a cold call, I ended up getting Walmart corporate. I worked with Walmart for about 8 weeks and then kind of decided I wanted to go a different direction. But I worked with them 5 to 6 days a week for 8 straight weeks, like 2 months after I went into business. I worked with Lockheed, with Vanguard Resources, with Ardent Health, with Tyga Boats, UHS, Hardin Simmons, ACU and McMurray, Amarillo College, Tenet Health, Friona, Plains Dairy, and a whole lot more. But on each one of these clients, the reason I wanted to show you some of a client list is it doesn't matter if you're making boats or helping people heal or building aircraft or raising cattle or processing dairy. No matter what you're doing, you're dealing with people. The consistent thing in every organization is if we can get our people to perform at the highest level, we love going to work and our work is easy. But anytime our people give us fits, we get really frustrated going to work and we start thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this or not. So we want to make sure that we're putting ourselves in a position where we have a consistent coaching framework to help others. And one of the questions that was asked on the chat is if we can get the slides to review later. And absolutely, I will send out the slides to everybody in attendance so you have those to review later as well. So here's the 3 frameworks that I find to be absolutely critical for creating the change that you want in your workplace. The first is the drama slide. The drama framework shows that there's 3 basic reasons that drama exists in the workplace. When we play each of these roles in the wrong way, the hero, the victim, or the villain, then we create more drama for the people around us. When we're playing the hero, we're looking at other people and going, I don't think you're capable, so I better do this for you. It's also the reason that a lot of managers and leaders end up completely burned out because they're trying to save everybody around them. We don't need to save people. So the hero's journey is a 4-stage process. And you do want to be the hero of your own story, but you don't want to be the hero of somebody else's story. So the hero's journey is life is normal. And then, oh my gosh, something went sideways. You have a global pandemic, you have chaos at work, you have something that goes sideways, whatever it is, we have something that goes wrong. In that exact moment, in the stress or the struggle or the setback, that determines whether you're going to be the hero of your own story, whether you're going to be the victim in your story or whether you're going to be the villain in your story. The commonality between the hero and the villain is that they both went through struggle. The villain decided to be angry at other people and blame other people and lash out. The hero decided to go through the struggle of overcoming the challenge and becoming better. They controlled their self-concept. The victim in the struggle is stuck in the struggle. They're waiting for somebody to save them, and they're looking for somebody to blame. So when we have those three things played the wrong way, then we have drama in the workplace. That's important because we spend on average between 5 and 6 weeks full-time dealing with conflict in work. Most of the time, that conflict is somebody else's conflict. It's two employees not getting along, two volunteers butting heads. It's two people not doing what they're supposed to do, and we have to step in. You need a framework to get people out of each of those things. So the framework to get out of being somebody else's hero is be the hero of your own story, but for other people, be a caring respecter. If I care about you and your growth, I'm not taking away your opportunity to learn and to struggle. The struggle is what is critically important for us to become better, because the third stage on the hero's journey, when you're playing the hero of your own story, is the refinement stage. And when you're going through refinement, you intentionally put yourself in this difficult place where you have to learn, you have to grow, you have to get better. You can think of any great movie and you look at the hero of the story in the movie, and they intentionally step into the struggle so that they learn and grow and get refined so that they come back fourth stage with a new superpower or something better. When we try to play somebody else's hero, then we take away that opportunity for them to be the hero of their own story. Our job is to be their guide. That's a caring respecter. That's a vulnerable problem solver. That's an empathetic driver. The guide plays 3 roles. So when I care about you deeply enough, I won't take away your struggle because that's what makes you stronger. I will respect that you have the capability, and I will try to draw that out of you. When you're playing the victim, I'm going to show you how to be vulnerable, typically by telling you a story about another person who went through something similar. And then I'm going to guide you in the problem-solving process, which is a 5-step process, another framework that's in the coaching stuff that we teach on how to actually solve that problem and overcome it. When you're acting like a villain, when you're lashing it out at other people, you're being mean, you're causing problems, I'm going to be an empathetic driver as a guide. So when I'm guiding you, I'm going to try to understand your situation, and I'm going to try to get in there to help you understand how to shift perception. So going back to the person that I drew the circle, said, this is you, and the 5 circles around it. These are all the people around you. I was using that to get them to see a different perspective and ask the question, what could you do in the next 24 hours that would make them perceive you at one higher level of rating? By asking it in that way, I put it in a better place where they could actually succeed. So the 3-question framework for accountability that kind of ties in with this, whether it's a hero, victim, or villain, is something happens, they do something that goes wrong, and you ask, can you walk me through what happened? The reason you don't ask the question, why did you do that? Number 1 is it doesn't work. And number 2, it triggers the emotional part of the brain to come up with a defensive reason on why they did what they did. Never ask the question, why did you do that? It only leads to emotional responses. Emotional responses do not lead to positive behavior change. Can you walk me through what happened? That triggers the prefrontal cortex, the logical aspect of the brain, and they just describe the process. If you take your time and listen to them using focus on the speaker, respond non-verbally, ask good questions, feedback what you heard, if you're using your listening techniques and you're saying, okay, and then you did this, and then you did this, just like on the lady that was consistently late for work, like I did with that, then I asked the question, at what point could you have done something different? Kind of in the same way that I asked her, well, what do you think you could do differently that would lead you being on time? I need that person to come up with the answer. If I provide the answer for them, it's external. So this one concept within accountability, I want you to absolutely get. And this is based on a theory called the locus of control theory. Locus is Latin for location. So the location of control is either internal, I made a choice, or external, it was outside of my control. If the person explains the things that they did as external, then they're going to be a victim or a villain. If they explain the things that they did in their process as internal, then they become the hero of their own story and you become their guide and you guide them in the direction they need to go. But that second question creates the point of explanation. That is creating past accountability. The third question creates future accountability. What will you do next time? The mistake that I see so many managers and leaders make is they say, oh my gosh, why did you do that? That's mistake number one. Second question they ask wrong is, you should have done this. Why didn't you? And they tell them what they should have done. So emotional and then external. And then they say, next time you need to do, and they describe what they should do in the future. So you have emotion, external, external, no ownership from the person who you're asking to change. The whole point of accountability is getting that person to choose to behave in a different way. If they choose to behave in a different way, everything changes for the better. If they don't make the choice to behave in a different way, things remain the same and you just repeat that cycle over and over and over again, which leads us to the third framework that kind of goes with this, the BTAR framework: belief, thought, action, result. So I want you to think about what you believe about yourself and your situation. That will lead to what you think about the things that you experience. That will determine what you do as you interact as an employee or a manager or a leader. And that is predictive of the outcomes that you get. Everything in our world is actually cause and effect. What you do creates what you get. But there's two steps before the do that are really important to keep in mind. The first step is, what do I believe about me? If you've planted the idea, I think you should be able to do this. I mean, you've demonstrated that you're relatively intelligent. You've changed other things in the past. I've seen you succeed. I believe you can. Do you? When they say yes, they believe that they can, it starts to shift their thoughts about the things that they're experiencing, and you naturally get new actions. Napoleon Hill told a story about this young salesperson in the insurance world who he was failing. He had been trying to sell insurance for 6 months. He had sold 0 insurance policies in 6 months. He was taking a beating and he had put everything he had into it and he was almost out of money. So he went to W. Clement Stone, who had the combined insurance company. And he said, Mr. Stone, is there any way you could give me a few leads? I know you're wildly successful. You're the most successful insurance salesman in the United States. Can you help me? They said, you know what? Come back tomorrow. I'll have you a list of 10 prospects. So he comes back the next day, gives him this list of names and phone numbers, 10 prospects. The kid is stoked. He's like 24 years old. He's like, I've got this. And he goes out and he calls on all 10 of those. 9 of them say yes. 9 out of 10, 90% closing rate, which is phenomenal because he believe that W. Clement Stone had given him quality leads because he was the greatest salesperson that existed in the insurance world. So we thought, these people are desperately going to want what I have. And he took the actions to call on them and be persistent and overcome objections and move them in the right direction, which resulted in a 90% close rate. New belief, new thought, new action, new result. He goes back after a week. He said, Mr. Stone, that was fantastic. So appreciative of those 10 leads. 9 out of 10 said yes. Is there any way you could give me 10 more leads? Like, I really want to close more. I've called on other people, but nobody who's wanting to talk to me. He said, you know what? Come back tomorrow. I'll get you 10 more high quality leads. Comes back the next day, gives him another 10, closes all 10 of those leads. So now he's got 19 new clients from 20 leads. Comes back again, Mr. Stone, can you give me just 10 more leads? Please, please, please. You know, everything that you give me is the perfect lead. He said, you know what? Come in here for just a second. And he comes in, walks into his office, and he says, I'm literally just randomly picking people out of the phone book and I'm handing them to you. I don't know these people. I've never met them. I just gave you 20 random people out of a phone book. You can go close anything that you want to close if you believe you're capable. The kid was blown away. And the next year he became one of the top salespeople in the country because he finally believed he was actually capable. New belief, new thought, new action, new result. The thing that we have to get to is we have to get frustrated with our own outcomes so that we get drawn towards a new belief. You as a coach, you as a leader, that's where you come in. Your job is to inspire new beliefs through accountability and through being a guide as you move people in the right direction. When you do this in the right way, you help people achieve at such a significantly higher level than they ever would have been capable of achieving at. I love some of these stories because it represents exactly what's going on with us. When I went into business, for the first 30 days, I only closed one deal. And I had just quit a job making over 70,000 a year, company car, expense account, all the cool stuff. And this was back in 1999. And I went, okay, this is not going to work out well. I'm married, I have a kid. I told my wife this was going to be awesome. She's already not going to believe me because I did not crush it in the first 30 days. I went and hired a coach. That coach helped me understand a better strategy for the sales process and a better set of interview questions that I could use. And in the next 30 days after that, I went from 2,000, one deal, to 6 deals and 12,000 in revenue. And I stayed at that 12,000 in monthly revenue for the next year based on the strategy that I was taught. The thing that is fascinating to me is that we know we want people to be at the highest level of performance. So when you look at the cost of turnover at the entry level, the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts that number, as well as two other organizations, Accountability International and the Saratoga Institute. They put that number at about $4,000 for a minimum wage entry-level position. The more you move up and the more you pay a person, the more it costs you when they turn over. When you lose somebody, I would say nursing is one of the highest non-management positions as far as the cost of turnover. When you lose somebody, it's crazy expensive. Right now, they're estimating that nurses are costing us about $85,000 for every one RN that turns over. A manager costs you about 1 to 1.5 times that person's annual salary. If you get into an executive or an upper leader, you're talking about 3 to 4 times that person's annual salary. So we are spending money on things that we should not spend money on. We should be spending money on the things that actually get us results. And I've really hit 5 frameworks. These are the 3 key, but I also talked about shifting perception. That was the bubble framework. And then I talked about the 4 steps of listening, which is the connection framework. And if you take these 5 frameworks, and if you do nothing else but these 5 frameworks, you will find that you can reduce turnover and increase employee performance, which results in greater net profits for you. And I think that that's really important because we're in such a competitive economy that we need to push ourselves in that right direction. I have 70 frameworks that I teach in my coaching certification, and I would love for you guys to participate in this. I'm going to teach 3 additional frameworks in an email series that I'll release on Monday, but it's $2,500 to get certified as an executive coach. And then anybody else in your organization that you want to join in, it's only half of that amount. If we reduce turnover by 1 entry-level employee, we've more than paid for the certification. You take somebody that is in the sales game, if you increase the sales by 10% for each one of your people by creating stronger internal accountability, you significantly outweighed the one-time cost of the certification. My job is to make sure that you get tremendous value. If you go to the certification, which I would love for you to go to, and it releases, the email series will release on Monday, and then you'll be able to sign up shortly after that, if that's something that you want to do. But if you go to that, I will tell you, if in the first day you do not believe that it is giving you the value that you want, you can get all your money back, no questions asked. All you have to say is, I don't think this is working for me, I want out, and we'll send you a full refund. If you decide you want to do this, though, what I've experienced when I've taught other people these frameworks is that by the end of the first day, they're thinking, I really wish I'd have had this stuff when I first went into business. That's what most people are looking at. So you're going to receive a few extra training tips. I'll send those out starting on Monday. Based on the request from Dondi, I will also send out a copy of the PowerPoint so you can see those specific frameworks and you can use that to kind of start building the potential of your team. I have a couple of other things that I do. One of them is that we have a weekly email series called Quick Leadership Tips. If you're interested in that, you just go to the homepage of my website. About halfway down, it'll say Quick Leadership Tips, and it's a 90-second training video that you can use in weekly staff meetings, or you can just use for your own personal development, whatever you prefer. But I have about 1,600 people that are on that email list now. That have used that in order to build their own potential and to build up the potential of others. A question that Allison asked is, can we receive the recording? Yep, I will edit it just a little bit. And then on Monday, that'll be a part of that email series where you'll have access to go get the recording from this. And I did record this today. So I'll make sure that you have as many resources as I can give you. And I want to make sure that you can succeed at the highest levels. If you use those 5 frameworks and then you use the other additional resources that we offer through our website, I believe what you'll see is a tremendous positive change in your people. Where we are right now is the expectation that Generation Z will have upwards of 20 jobs in their career. That's a lot of jobs when you compare that the baby boomers were anticipated to have between 3 and 5 jobs, the Xers between 6 and 10, and the millennials between 10 and 15. So we're now at this point where about every 18 to 24 months, people are leaving. But when you look at the research that's out there from Harvard, Harvard is saying that there's a basic reasons that people are leaving. And this is the last bonus I'm going to give you here, and then I'm going to be out of time. There are 6 psychological needs that people have. When you meet 2 of the psychological needs, you retain people. When you meet 3 of the psychological needs, you not only retain them, you engage them, and they give you discretionary effort. So the first of the psychological needs is a need for certainty. We want to know what to expect on a regular basis, and we want to know that we've been trained and prepared for that. The second is we want autonomy. We want to be at least somewhat self-directed in the work that we do so that we have the ability to feel like we're in control of a portion of our world. The third of the psychological needs that we have is we have a need for connection. Maslow talked about this with the sense of belonging right in the center of his hierarchy of needs for motivation. You use swag, and I know Talon's on here. Talon LPE has been phenomenal about swagging their people out, make sure they got Talon gear all the time so they have a sense of belonging to that organization. So that connection is important. That's where you do team building, you do things where you get together, you are intentional about building the relationships within the team. The fourth one is significance. This is valuing and appreciating your people. We all want to know that what we're doing matters beyond just a paycheck and that we're valued for what we're doing. So when you show appreciation, when you did X, I felt because, just like what we talked about in the plant, anchor, and reinforce, that's what makes people actually feel significant in the workplace. And the final 2, almost everybody is driven by these. That is, I want to have a purpose that's bigger than me and bigger than just earning a paycheck. I want to have an emotional reason to show up to work every day and make an impact. And then I want to know that I'm getting better. So your personal growth and your personal development. And the younger 2 generations, the millennials and Generation Z, the greatest retention factor for them is ensuring that you have trained and prepared them to be successful and that you did not put them in a situation where they could not win. They expect training, they expect development, they expect you to coach and mentor them. If you do that, you retain them. If you don't do that, it's unlikely that you're going to retain them.